Sometimes we even find that we maybe can't express ourselves emotionally, or people will say like, I feel like I can't cry. And a lot of that might be because we are still trying to comprehend and deal with the shock of it all and trying to understand what the heck just happened, and coping with our new reality is absolutely overwhelming. And that is largely because not enough time has passed for us to comprehend what has happened yet. Our brain doesn't yet understand the trauma it has suffered, and it is essentially trying to play a game of catch up. This is the Life with Grief podcast, the podcast that talks about and normalizes the complexities of grief, life after loss, and all this entails, and so much more. I want you to think of this podcast as a safe space where I'm a friendly face and we're just journeying through this together to figure out how to live life with our grief in tow. I'm your host, Tara Accardo. I'm a grief and transformational life coach, and I'm here to serve you guidance, support, tangible coping tools, inspiration, and some laughs along the way to help you cultivate a more meaningful, intentional, and beautiful life. But grieving or not, we're getting into countless topics here on the podcast, from coping with loss to self-development and so much more. I'm so grateful you're here. Let's dive right in. Hello and welcome back to the Life with Grief podcast. I'm your host, Tara Accardo, and today we are talking about a very important topic in terms of grief and navigating loss, and that is shock. If you have experienced a loss of any kind, really, whether it be a death, a sudden divorce, a breakup, whatever this is, you have likely experienced a form of shock along the way. And here's the thing, and I feel like this is especially even with a death specifically, even if you see that coming, and it's just hanging over you like the heaviest rain cloud possible, little can prepare you for when you actually lose a loved one or go through that breakup or a job loss or something else entirely. Because all of these and more deserve to be recognized, and they can all be equally shocking. But fear not, because there are ways to work through this shock and to find some semblance of peace again through it all. And I promise you this shock does wear off. But the thing is, it can also show itself in other ways. So I think it's a really important topic to talk about just to try and get ahead of that a little bit. So today we're going to just acknowledge the trauma that shock from a loss can leave on our heart and on our soul and our mind, and talk about ways to cope with it. So let's talk about when shock is the worst and why it is the worst, because it seriously is. And here's the thing, truthfully, it can take a long time for shock to wear off. There is no right or wrong answer here. There's no right or wrong way to really navigate shock. It is so very much your own. If your loss happened a little while ago now, but you are still feeling pangs of shock, please understand how normal and absolutely okay that is. Not that you need my permission here, but I'm giving it to you anyway. I just want you to know how well accompanied you are in that boat of complete and utter shock, because many grievers feel that shock for years after a loss. Sometimes we even find that we maybe can't express ourselves emotionally, or people will say like, I feel like I can't cry. And a lot of that might be because we are still trying to comprehend and deal with the shock of it all. So I should mention though, that with acute grief, especially this type of grief that happens immediately after a loss, there can be a lot of shock. And you likely know this if you've been there, which if you're listening to this podcast, I imagine you have. And trying to understand what the heck just happened and coping with our new reality is absolutely overwhelming. And that is by far when it feels the most painful and the most raw for many grievers. And that is largely because not enough time has passed for us to comprehend what has happened yet. Our brain doesn't yet understand the trauma it has suffered, and it is essentially trying to play a game of catch up. And as we develop new experiences and continue to move through our life, our brain updates its virtual map of sorts, and it begins to understand what life looks like now without the thing or without the person that we've lost. New predictions are made, and literally, moment by moment, situation by situation, our brain begins to understand that our loved one, for example, if we're talking about a death, which I think is the most common type of loss that we might feel some shock around, they won't walk through the door at 5:30 p.m. after work, for example, or, whenever it is that we're so accustomed to seeing them or talking to them or whatever this looks like. So I want to make this next point abundantly clear. It's super important to be really, really gentle with yourself here. Shock, this disbelief that we feel, this can quite literally take our breath away. And grief and this sensation of just absolute powerlessness can really affect our psyche and our heart and our mind. And to just take this a step further, anguish also often accompanies shock. And this can cause us to feel like we are just crumbling in on ourselves. And, the human spirit, we are resilient. And just as we can reclaim our ability to breathe and feel, that takes help and it takes time. And I want to clarify, time alone does not heal our grief. It is not that miraculous. I wish it was. It does take some work, but that is the purpose of this podcast and everything I do. Listen, I wish I could give you some magical elixir to calm you in these moments of anguish and shock, but I have found it's really just one of those things where we have to get used to it. We have to build up our tolerance a little bit, and we have to allow those feelings to come in so as not to become closed off or rigid in our grief. And I've seen this happen. Grief can absolutely do this to people if we allow it to. So my challenge to you today is to not succumb to this. It is to rise above this. And to do that, we have to know how to bring ourselves back down sort of from the high of anguish and shock. And ultimately, we do this through a lot of different ways. We can do this through breath work and bringing our body and mind back to the present moment. But there's also a little bit more to it than that. And we certainly have a few more coping tools to talk about here today. So with that, let's get into some of these just to get you started. And also, I want to preface this might be a higher level conversation for some of us here. But again, if you are newer with your grief or your loss has more recently happened and you're feeling such intense shock, almost like you kind of can't overcome it, this episode is so for you. Or if you know someone who is sort of in this state and might be struggling, please share this. It's so important. Shock and that anguish I was mentioning is not something to mess around with. And I really feel like, I don't say that to scare anyone, but I feel like this is something where if we, like I alluded to earlier, if we can kind of get ahead of it and we can really manage these emotions well, it really serves us well long-term in our grieving journey. So first things first, and this one is pretty simple, let yourself feel your feelings. Cry, scream, listen to sad music, listen to happy music, whatever you need to do to process your emotions. And whatever this looks like, I don't want you to feel an ounce of shame about it. Is this painful at times? Yes, it is. But guess what? We've all been there. In some capacity, we can all relate to this. It is natural to feel a range of emotions after experiencing a loss and then subsequently shock, including sadness, anger, confusion, disbelief. The list goes on. So allow yourself to feel these emotions without judgment or self-criticism or worry about what others will say for even a moment. And seriously, people will probably try and say something about it, or they might impose their opinion, or they might say like, hey, this worked for me, this will work for you, or whatever. platitudes or advice under the sun that you might get, my best advice, if that is coming in your direction, is really to just handle it with grace. Say thank you, put it in the back of your mind for later, right? We maybe don't want to necessarily cut people off or be like, nope, that's not going to work for me, because I'm telling you right now, what worked for me now did not work for me in the beginning of my grieving journey, and vice versa. So we just have to be open-minded through this process, which I know is so hard when we have so much going on and there's so many emotions and all the things coming at us from all directions as we're grieving. But as I always say, moment by moment, keeping it all on an open mind, and that's all we can do. And I can't stress this enough. Do not try to suppress your feelings or just pretend that everything is okay. Acknowledge these emotions and give yourself permission to grieve wholeheartedly. And here's the thing, by suppressing emotions, if that's what you somehow end up doing and not giving them anywhere to go, especially over time, we can really kind of damage ourselves emotionally and sometimes even physically, because this can create, psychological issues and even physical issues from stress. So, you can think here like a stiff jaw, a tight and achy, back or neck or shoulders, high blood pressure. The list goes on here. So again, I always say these things not to scare anybody. It's more just like, what better reason do you have to cope with your emotions the proper way? And second sort of coping tool here that's sort of related to this is practicing self-care. I always feel like I have to joke about this and say, like, yes, I know this is such a buzzword, but really what I mean here is now more than ever, especially when you're in such a state of shock and your body is quite literally in survival mode, this is the time to focus on yourself. And yes, I know this can be difficult sometimes when you might have to take care of a family or children, or you're working, or a plethora of other things. And also, just to interrupt myself really quick, just to add on to my last point, I think it's really important to note that, with expressing our emotions, this can feel really hard to do when we're maybe in front of children and we want to be cautious with how we're expressing ourselves, or maybe we're at work and we just can't break down in the moment. I completely hear you and see you on that if that is a concern of yours. This is why I really encourage grievers to quite literally schedule in time for their grief, to see it, to witness it every single day. So whether that's, a 5 or 10 minute period of time where you just cry if you have to, or you scream into your pillow if you have to, or whatever this looks like for you, however you can let that out in a healthy way on your terms, that's what I want you to do. Okay. And so when it comes to self-care, kind of same, but different, right? I challenge you to not make excuses here. Do not allow this to fall by the wayside. Stand up for yourself and what you need, because everyone is entitled to some me time. Grief or not, let's be real. So think about this for a second. What would this look like for you? Is it taking a bath with some Epsom salts? Is it, eating your favorite comfort food? Trying to make this a healthy decision too. Okay, I'm not talking ice cream here, although listen, a little bit of that never hurt anyone, in my opinion. Is it binge watching your favorite show for the 18th time? I have been there. I have done that. Is it taking a 20-minute, walk to decompress? Highly, highly recommend that. Treating yourself like the queen or the king that you are. Curling up on the couch and taking a nap, reading a book that inspires you, or even if it doesn't inspire you, maybe it just distracts you for a little while. Being cautious with what plans you make and being cautious not to overextend yourself. Because the thing is, with shock, we're more prone to grief bursts and various triggers, more than usual, I would say, at least. And this isn't to say that you have to barricade yourself indoors until that goes away, until your shock goes away. In fact, I'm asking you to do the opposite. We need to take baby steps to put ourselves out there again, to get acclimated with life. And it's a life that looks and feels very different than we're used to. So this is another reason that I say we have to be so gentle. We have to take this a moment at a time, a step at a time, because we can really feel like we are walking on glass here a little bit. It's very scary. It's unsettling. It's not a fun place to be. I really want to acknowledge that. Shock can feel like a lot. It's very heavy, and it can be, there's a lot of fear associated with that sometimes. So really, it's all about tapping into our intuition and feeling out what is right for us in that moment. And this, is outside of our shock too. This is just day-to-day life stuff. So if you've never been great with being present, I want to encourage you to do that. And what better time to start? And by the way, I have resources on this. I have a whole blog post about this. I definitely mention this in some episodes here on the podcast. This is what we address together, and I go much more into detail and depth on this in my membership. There's plenty of things here that can help you through this. And the more we get in touch with this piece of ourselves, the more successful we will be at taming our shock. Hey, my friend, are you needing some relief from your grief? If so, I have an exciting new offering coming really soon that will help you get exactly that. My 14-day Relief in Your Grief challenge brings you powerful, impactful, bite-sized daily content alongside the perfect meditation. One of the biggest struggles I hear from my members, clients, and people on social media is that they just need some relief from the stress, sadness, and pain that grief and loss can cause. But here's the thing. So many people are lost and unsure about where to start. This can feel like a huge thing to tackle, so we are doing it together, and we're starting with just 14 days. Give me 2 weeks and I will help you begin to take that anxiety, heartache, and anguish and turn it into peace, clarity, and hope as you move forward with your grief. Seriously, what do you have to lose by joining? Challenge your grief and give yourself some relief, my friend. I have no doubt this 14 days will be an inspiring, uplifting, perspective-changing experience for you. My mailing list will be the first to hear about when this challenge is live. Join now through the link in the show description. Another coping tool I really want to mention, and I kind of just joked about this, but I really do mean this in all seriousness, is not skimping on a healthy and well-balanced diet. So you might be wondering, okay, Tara, how does this relate to shock? Let me break it down for you. Amidst all of this shock and anguish, I know how difficult it can be to even feel like cooking or making time to prepare the most healthy and nutritious meal in the world. That feels like a big ask. And again, trust me, I have been there. Eating even was the last thing on my mind in my early stages of grief. I cannot stress enough, though, how critical this is. There are some really easy recipes and dishes out there that are just a Google search away. Or if there's a restaurant near you that can do the heavy lifting for you, go for it. Explore that instead. The ask here is to just be mindful with your choices. Foods that are heavy and high in salt, fat, carbohydrates, those can often make us feel more lethargic, more tired, and more inclined to be sedentary. And with grief, and I know this can be harsh, you guys, the goal is to get some movement in. And it's really easy to succumb to our bed or our couch. But all I am saying here is that balance is key. And diet is a big component of that. A balanced diet and a balance of relaxation and movement, all of this together is the perfect recipe. No pun intended there, but let's go with it, is the perfect recipe for good grief coping. And pretty soon, your mind will begin to feel this balance too. And that is the key to getting accustomed to our grief and getting ourselves sort of out of this state of shock. And lastly here, I should mention, make sure you are drinking enough water. I hope this goes without saying, but with water, you want to make sure that you're consuming at least half your body weight in ounces each day. And so avoiding soda and sugary drinks when possible, all of this can be really important for making sure that we are staying hydrated and staying sharp and staying on top of it. And this will also really help your brain function and clarity more than you can imagine, I promise you. Another coping tool I love to mention is to create a routine. I have an entire podcast episode just on this topic, so definitely go check that out. I will link that in the show description as well. But I truly cannot express the importance of a routine enough. So whether this is going to bed at the same time every night and getting up at the same time each morning, just having that routine that you can depend on. Maybe it's going for a walk each day. A big one for me was journaling. This really, I felt, set me up for success each and every morning. I did just like 5 minutes a day. And by the way, I literally created my Loss Has Become Gains daily journal specifically for grievers. So you can do this too. And I love my journal that I created because it asks you really specific and thought-provoking and impactful questions that I think are really important for grievers specifically. But listen, grieving or not, just having a journaling practice every day, I do a little in the morning and a little in the evening. It can really shift your mindset, you guys. Definitely go check that journal out. Also linked in the show description. But perhaps it's something that just sparks a little bit of joy for you too, like lighting a candle that you love, or your morning cup of coffee or tea, and just being really present with that as you hold that warm cup in your hands. I mean, think about this. And it's just one little thing each day that you can commit to. And then you could always work up to adding more things into there if you want to. But take a moment and pause and ask yourself this. Do you have a solid routine that you can depend on? And if not, what would your ideal routine look like? What is something that you can maybe add or remove from your current routine, if you do have one, to make this more enjoyable for yourself? Because the thing is, I don't want a routine to be something that you dread doing or, again, doesn't spark joy for you. It's really just so important because having a sense of structure can help you feel more grounded and in control in a time that can feel very, very out of control. And it's a great practice to be present with what is in front of you while also giving you something to look forward to and something you can depend on. So just a few things to think about there. Think about what in your routine could make your day just a little bit better and a little bit brighter. Practicing mindfulness is another really big one that I love to hammer home. I will keep this one short and sweet because there are seriously so many resources that I have on this between the podcast and a blog post all about this. And I actually have a free downloadable toolkit for you as well. I will also link that here. That's on my website. But I'll just share this quick thought around this. Shock requires a lot of presence and a lot of patience. When we can take a breath and focus intentionally on what is in front of us, on what the situation in front of us entails, that is truly one of the first steps to comprehending our grief and our sort of new life now, if you will, whatever our situation and whatever our loss may be. And I'm going to dig into this a little bit further in a few minutes in terms of what we can put into practice to be mindful with our grief and those griefy or shocking thoughts. But I just want to plant the seeds here. And when you're practicing this presence, by the way, I love meditation for this especially. There are very specific meditations that you can do around this. Really getting in touch with your five senses. So what are you smelling, hearing, seeing, feeling? All of these things to kind of just get us in touch with like, okay, it grounds us. It gets us in touch with what is happening right here, right now. Because shock can really make us feel like we're a little bit out of our body, out of our experiences here a little bit. So in getting in touch with like what is around us right in that moment, that is a great way to sort of cope with our shock, especially if it's really overcoming us in the moment. Next is to focus on gratitude. You might not believe this right now, or you might be internally telling me to kick rocks with this be grateful stuff. And if so, you are entitled. There was a time in my grief where that was the last thing I wanted to hear. But hear me out on this one thing here. Here is the thing about life. Death is an unavoidable part of it, especially if this is you and you are going through a loss in terms of a loved one or a pet or whoever this is for you right now. This is especially for you. It is deeply painful when we witness it, when it happens to us, however it happened. And it is very scary to think about even our own demise. This is not the most fun subject in the world. I hear you. It is all about perspective, though, and we have to remember that. So think about it. Maybe you have learned a valuable lesson. Perhaps you are getting to know a part of yourself that you didn't know before. And by the way, when I pose these things to you, depending on where you are in your grief journey, and if you're listening to this specific episode, you might be a little bit earlier on. I just want to say here, there was a time earlier on in my grieving journey where I did not and I could not hear some of the things that are coming out of my mouth right now. I was not ready for it. I didn't believe it. And I really rejected it. What I have found is that it's really important to hear these things. Not just the platitudes, not just the, oh, don't worry, it'll get better, time will heal. Not like that. It's just that I always want to encourage you and empower you to know that happiness and joy and fulfillment, those are all available to you. And that is all within your reach, even when it feels like it's not. And I know that is a hard thing to wrap our head around sometimes. So I just want to leave it at that. And as far as gratitude goes, I also just want to clarify, as always, it is not simply just finding things to be grateful for in each and every day and just like leaving it at that. And, it's not just this idea of like, oh, just be grateful. Be grateful you're still alive. Be grateful you had these people in your life as long as you did. No. It is, again, being present with what is around us still, who is showing up for us, what beautiful life experiences are already ahead of us, because I have no doubt many beautiful life experiences are ahead of you. And it's just finding gratitude in literally anything that we can. And the thing with that gratitude practice, which again, I put in the Losses Become Gains daily journal because it is that important. It's just those little things where if we can shift our mindset each and every day to be like, wow, there is still beauty here. There are things I can and should still be grateful for, even though I'm feeling very ungrateful right now. Those little mindset shifts will completely shift our grief, and it can turn our entire journey on its head. So I just want you to keep this in the back of your mind right now. I know this might feel like a tough concept to digest, but hear me out as always, and just know that you are not at all alone in this journey. And with that being said, that is a perfect segue to my next point here, and a very important aspect of coping, and that is to seek support. This hopefully goes without saying, but an alarming number of people I have come across and people that I've coached absolutely do not or have refused to reach out for help. And finally they do, but many people don't. And I can't tell you how many resources exist for you. Number one, of course, hopefully, is your internal support system of friends and family. A best friend, a family member, heck, maybe even your pet. And sure, they might not be able to talk back to you. And if they're human, they might not always have the best advice. Let's face it. But even so, even just being able to vent about how shocking your loss is and how it's affecting you, even if it doesn't make sense right now, that is such a healthy and cathartic thing to do. And sometimes all you need is someone to listen and offer just a little bit of comfort. And I understand that, again, sometimes friends and family, they might have a little emotional entanglement into all of this, especially if they have maybe lost the same person that you have, for example. So in that case, again, I recommend professional support, a therapist, myself as a grief coach. We are here for you as a more impartial third party, but can also really support you through this process. There is a whole slew of people on social media and in my community and my membership that can empathize with at least some of what you're experiencing right now. Despite us all experiencing grief differently and having different relationships with those that we've lost, shock can be a pretty universal sensation, right? So whoever you can find, whether it's maybe a Facebook of like-minded people, finding your tribe on some other social platform, attending a grief group, like I said, exploring counseling maybe, taking advantage of the group coaching calls if you join my membership. There's just, you guys, there's so many options out there waiting for you. And thankfully, our society still has a long way to go as far as grief literacy goes, but there are more and more resources out there for you, and they can cost little to nothing. Real quick interruption here, and then we'll get back to this episode. If you're someone who is experiencing some form of loss and are trying to navigate the complexities of grief, which you likely are in some capacity if you've stumbled upon this podcast, then this message is for you. If you haven't heard about my Life with Grief membership and community yet, this is truly something you need to check out. This membership is here to guide you into living a deeper, more meaningful, and full life after experiencing loss. Who doesn't want that, right? I created this membership because I know what it's like to navigate and cope with grief on a daily basis, and I know the tools and support it takes to do this effectively. I've done the work myself, and I've coached people just like you to do the same. It comes down to having impactful, effective resources and tools at your disposal, having the right support around you from people who can understand and empathize with your grief, and having encouragement and inspiration around you consistently to not only elicit and spark change, but to keep it and keep the positive momentum going. Enrollment opens once a month for a limited time. Check out the details linked in the description, and I hope to see you in there. So last but not least, in my little list of coping tools here is to just be patient with yourself. I hated it early on when people would tell me to just give it time. So I'm not going to sit here and tell you to do that today. But I guess I kind of am in a way, because the sad reality is that, especially with shock, it does take some time to wear off. It takes a hot minute for our brain to understand what has happened and what this means for us and how to even begin moving forward. And there's really no right or wrong way to do it. But I do hope today that I've made it a little bit clear that there are some better and healthier ways to cope with that. For me personally, and certainly people that I have one-on-one coached or coached in my membership, I honestly found it useful to talk to myself. And I know that sounds funny, but whether it was out loud or in my own head, didn't matter. Seriously, try it out. State the facts and see how that feels. So for example, on the morning that my dad died and I was just sitting there trying to comprehend the gravity of the situation, some of my thoughts were, okay, both my mom and dad are gone. They have died. They have actually died. And I repeated that to myself, I don't know how many times. I still do, because I still almost can't comprehend that. Another thought I had was, I am by myself right now. I no longer have my parents. I no longer have my parents. My main support system is gone. My immediate family, they are all gone. I can never talk to them again. I can never text them again. I can never hug them again. I will never hear their voices or laughs again. That guidance and advice I would seek from them is now gone because I cannot go to them for that in person. But is it gone? Or will it just evolve now? And my thoughts kind of just continued evolving from there. And I'm not going to lie, sitting there and saying those things factually to myself, that was not easy. In fact, that was painful, and I almost wish I waited a little bit longer to do that. But I really almost felt like I needed that in the moment. I was in such a state of like fight, flight, freeze that I needed. And so sometimes it really takes, like I was saying when we were talking about being present, it really takes that and processing it that way to help us ultimately overcome this shock that we're feeling. Now, with that last one that I just said, as far as, okay, I can't go to my parents now for advice or the guidance that I normally would have. But is that gone completely? Or will that evolve now? The last thing I want you to do here, and again, just think about this today, is to challenge your grief. The vibe changed a little bit on that last one, where I kind of left it open-ended. Is it gone? Or is this going to evolve? That's really what we need to do here. And again, if this is a little early for you, just hang with me on this. It's asking questions like that gets us digging deep and gets our thoughts provoked a little bit. That's where so much magic can happen. And that is where some beautiful aha moments can happen. And when we can do this over and over and over again, it's a really empowering action to be able to turn our grief on its head like that. Because by challenging our grief, we are opening our minds and our heart and our soul up to something bigger than ourselves. We come to know and understand that there is more going on here, and there's more to learn, and there's ways to grow from this. Again, if you were in any state of shock right now, I know this might not be where you're at, or you might not even have the energy for this, and that is okay. Just take it one moment at a time, one thought at a time, one question at a time, and it won't all be positive, as you likely know, but part of finding, I almost hate the word acceptance, but like resignation in what has happened and releasing this shock is acknowledging the painful reality. We can't get out of our shock without doing that to some degree. So as painful as this reality can be, with time and with that really important grief work that I am always preaching, it is possible to level out that shock factor. Because there's a level of acceptance that does inevitably happen. And sometimes it's really subtle, but it does happen. And notice I didn't say we accept what happened, right? Because we might never really accept what happened. And we don't have to. Don't force that, because the second we try and force that is the moment when we turn this sort of pressure cooker that we're already in on high to feel like we need to live up to societal norms and expectations of others in terms of how long this process is supposed to take. That is not what we want to do. I always want to be that friend that reminds you that this process is yours. You are on your own timeline, and that is a sacred and a beautiful thing. Okay? So I will leave you with this closing thought. You don't have to be strong all the time, but you are stronger than you think. You don't have to be strong all the time, but you are stronger than you think. Lean into that. Tap into that. And I have a sneaking suspicion you will surprise yourself. Ask yourself those tough questions, but be open to the things that can come through to you. Be open to the responses. I promise you, your spirit guides and the universe, they are all here to support you. And so am I. So with that all being said, thank you so much for tuning into this episode today. I really hope it was helpful. If it was, again, I would so appreciate you sharing this episode with someone who could use it, leaving a rating or review if you liked what you heard in this episode today or at any other point. on this podcast. I'm sending you a huge hug and lots of love as always, and I'll see you in the next episode. I am sending you a huge thank you for tuning into today's episode, my friend. I'm so grateful you're here and for the steps you are taking to heal your heart, open your mind, fulfill your soul, learn, grow, and evolve, and move through this crazy thing called life in big, beautiful, impactful ways. Visit lossesbecomegains.com for my blog, ways to work with me, to shop my daily journal, and so much more. And be sure you're following along on Instagram and Facebook at Life with Grief Podcast. I love seeing new faces, meeting new people, hearing your stories, and supporting you however I can. Be sure to hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. If you haven't left a rating or a review, please do so. I would so appreciate it. Or if you feel so inclined, to share this episode or this podcast with someone who could use it too. I'll catch you in the next episode.